for coming to our session today. My name is Hendrick and I work at Wellington College where I've been head of research for 3 years. This is Robin.
Hi, I'm Robin Macpherson. I'm the Assistant Director at Dollar Academy in Scotland, Central Scotland. I'm going to throw out a shameless plug for Research Head Scotland, September the 22nd, so please save the date. It would be lovely for you to all come and see us. It's a bit like this, but with hills. As Carl rightly says, we used to work together. We were content directors for the Telegraph Festival of Education, which was a great experience, and I was in charge of professional learning. So my side of things was really about staff development, Carl's was about research, and we worked well together for quite a number of years. So we're going to talk today about what came about. So 3 big things we want to have a look at. A contentious question, who needs evidence anyway? Then we're going to have a look at stealing the life of Lenin, what is to be done. Apologies, I'm a history teacher. And then thirdly, we're going to have a look at what we did, because we were interested in what things look like on a practical level in the classroom. That was our big thing, and that's what motivated us to do what we did. So we'll address that towards the end. So I want to start off with a provocation of sorts, and it's, who needs evidence anyway? After all, there are thousands of teachers who teach excellent lessons, and they've never heard of cognitive load theory. They don't care about learning styles. They've no interest in desirable difficulties, and yet they teach outstanding lessons. And many of these teachers are not just disinterested in evidence, but in some cases they're actively opposed to it. And I was thinking about this when I was reading Lindsay Fitzharris's amazing book called The Art of Butchering, and the case of Robert Liston, who was a surgeon in the 1840s. And he was a highly, highly skilled practitioner. He could amputate a leg in less than 2 minutes, which was an important thing to do in an age without any anesthesia or any knowledge of germ theory. But there was a fundamental paradox within this period of history. The mortality rates were huge, and they actually got worse in the 1850s. So although this individual was a highly skilled practitioner, he was operating in an age where there was very little engagement with evidence, and in many cases they were actively opposed to it. Liston used to stride around the theatre in a blood-encrusted apron, and in those days the more encrusted it was, the more senior and respected a surgeon you were. So let's contrast this with Ignaz Semmelweis. Around the same time, in Vienna, he took a rather different approach. He worked in a hospital where there were 2 wards. And in those 2 wards, there was strange things happening. In one ward, you had midwives delivering children, and there was a low mortality rate. In the other ward, where there was training male doctors, the mortality rate was really high. And he decided to look at evidence. And what he discovered was that there was some unseen agent from these doctors where they were performing autopsies, going and delivering babies, and there was a huge rate of infant mortality. So he studied it and he did some research, and he proposed that there was what he called cadaverous particles, and he did a test, and he insisted that the surgeons then wash their hands in a chlorinated lime solution, and lo and behold, the mortality rates went down. He wrote a paper, published the paper, and was roundly vilified by the medical community. One doctor said, "This is outrageous. How dare this man say that doctors should wash their hands? Doctors are gentlemen, and gentlemen's hands are clean." And this gave rise to the term the Semmelweis reflex, which is a sort of an instinctive reaction against new evidence that goes against established norms, beliefs, or paradigms. And I was thinking about the kinds of pedagogy that was offered to me when I started teaching, and so much of it was about showmanship. So much of it was about the teacher doing everything and students doing very little. And so we may not be at a point in history where we have a unified grand theory of learning or the equivalent of a germ theory, but I think there's an ethical imperative for teachers to be informed about what they do in the classroom. And that's why I think teachers should be more like Semmelweis and less like Robert Liston. So trying to link this into actually what we're doing in our day-to-day lives, we're not standing here in front of you as experts, we're not experts. We're teachers who recognise that we can always be better, and this is something we really do believe in. I know that you've seen this quotation before, but I think it should be wide and spread, stuck on staff notice boards, everything. All teachers need to improve their practice, not because they're not good enough, but because they can be better. So that's really where we're coming from philosophically. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit firstly is why I think there are barriers within professional learning, the way it's approached in an awful lot of schools and by a lot of teachers, to actually getting to that sort of stage that Dylan's talking about. So first up is the issue that you'll see this time and time again, that time is a problem and money is a problem. And in both of these, there's a perception that it's a zero-sum game. So in other words, if you're going to ask teachers to engage with research, that's taking up their time, which is finite, so something else has to get pushed out of the way. And the same goes with school budgets. If you're going to spend money on training up teachers effectively, then something's got to get pushed out of the way. So you children can't do music lessons because we're spending our money on our teachers instead. And it's that sort of approach that actually limits teachers and how they are able to develop professionally. Other problems, well, if you know much about David Weston's stuff from the Teacher Development Trust, you'll know that the vast majority of courses that are offered for teachers have very little impact, so you'd be better off on this course than you would on most courses that cost £300 to £500. Other issues, one size fits all, so the head of the school will think, right, everyone's going to get better at assessment this year, so all of you, let's do stuff on assessment, without actually taking into account what an individual teacher might want in terms of their professional learning, what they might need. And lastly, it's always attached to targets. We love a good target, don't we? So to show that you are developing year on year, if you're on performance-related pay or your professional development review and so on, you've got to say, these are my targets for the year, and I've got to show that I'm doing things. And if I don't go on a course, then I haven't shown that I've really done anything. So hard to evidence some of the sort of things that we're perhaps talking about.
So I think there are also some barriers for teachers in terms of education research. And traditionally, research has been something that's done to teachers and not something that's done by teachers. It's ostensibly been one-way traffic. There's a fantastic book called Inside Outside, where Cochrane Smith and Little make the point that for the long history of education research, teachers have been the researched and not the researchers. They have in effect been objects of study. The second issue is anybody who's doing any sort of academic research themselves will know that a lot of education research is written in a language that very few people understand. And even if it's accessible, even if you get a hold of it, it uses sort of phrases and terminology that if you're a busy teacher, it's just not really practical and not really useful. A lot of research is general but not specific. So it's good that there are randomized controlled trials, but again, if you're teaching maths to a tricky year 7 on a Tuesday morning, it may not work. It may not even work with different kids within the same class. So this idea of translation is it's a key issue. There is this kind of sense that classrooms are stable things, and if you put this intervention into place and you sail in this direction, you'll get to this end. But classrooms are inherently unstable, and interventions go awry, and things go wrong. Education research is not prone to certainty in the way that physics is. And so the other element is that a lot of research, although it might be interesting, a lot of it is sort of irrelevant. And you often see, or I have seen, people who are just fans of research. It's like they've just found a favourite album. And then they go, oh, I'm going to use that in my context or in my classroom. And I think that one of the sort of major problems is what Morozov calls solutionism. Solutions in search of a problem. I think we see that with the emergence of the Silicon Valley narrative. The idea that education is somehow broken and it needs to be fixed. Schools kill creativity, and the sort of savior in all of this is a little bit of Silicon Valley magic.
So we've outlined a whole load of problems there, and so we're just trying to throw you out some of our solutions to them. So it's up to you to decide whether or not you think they're any good, but just to get you thinking. So first up, this is a model that we can suggest that would take care of some of the financial problems we've already talked about, and also the fact that I think most courses are not really very useful at all, and they can certainly be very expensive. You know, if you think about it, okay, I'm a teacher, and what is the thing that I would like to know more about? What is the thing that I would like to be better at in my day-to-day practice? So have that professional dialogue with a colleague over a cup of coffee. It can be anything. And just think and reflect on that, and then go and look for something good to read. You know, like if you have a really good CPD library in your school, that's very helpful. If you don't, then you can certainly get on Twitter. It's very easy to stay in touch with people who can share really good resources for free. Once you've had a read about it, you become a bit more informed. Good to think about that, but I think it's really important to then go and observe that in context. Now, observation just isn't about lessons, although that can be extremely good, but also I think one of the best forms of professional development is to go and visit another school. I think it's far better to go and see another school and other people doing things that you haven't perhaps thought of or aren't doing than it is to actually go and sit in a hotel basement somewhere with a flip chart while somebody talks at you for most of the day. Once you've done that, sorry, last part, come back and writing about it. I think writing is very helpful. It certainly helped me reflect more deeply on my practice when I got into it. It can be as simple as writing a tweet, or you can keep your own professional log, or you can write a blog if you want to get a bit brave about it. There are loads of different levels, but I think that's something that's really good for processing. And then when you get back to the beginning, share what you've learned with your colleagues, carry on that discussion, carry on that professional dialogue, begin the cycle again. How much does that cost? Potentially nothing. Okay, this is what we talked about with CPD libraries. So here are some recommendations, but I'm going to take a picture of that. The slides will be available later on as well. So these are 10 books that really were influential for us. And when I actually just changed school and I thought, we need a CPD library, we don't have one. And I sat down and thought, what are the best books I can get? And the list very quickly came to about 50. So this is by no means comprehensive. Some of these are actually terrific books. Daisy's book about busting myths is great. Make It Stick is a bit of a cult classic. Daniel Williams, Why Don't Students Like School? Again, if you haven't already read it, strongly, strongly recommend it. Yes, we could go on.
I think that the key thing with some of these books is, it's amazing to me how many teachers will go for years without encountering any opposing views to one prevailing notion. And I can remember particularly reading Daisy's book. It seems like it's been out for years, but it hasn't really. It's only about 3 or 4 years old. And Dan Williams' book as well. And reading this stuff and thinking, I have never even heard the arguments that are being made in this. So yeah, this is...
well, to say another thing that widely available are a lot of research papers are being effectively condensed down and written by people as well who know that the target audience is teachers rather than other academics. And this is a great example of, if you know Oliver Cavalioli, he worked on our book and was brilliant as an illustrator, so he does these fantastic things. In this case, this is him showing in just one page the 10 Principles of Instruction by Barack Rosenstein, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Again, if you were to sit down with that and look through it and think, okay, how much of this am I doing? What could I improve at? What could I add to my lessons to mix it up a little bit? That's a great form of reflection. That's available for free. You can get on Twitter. And also another one of my bugbears is that school development plans aren't really bespoke enough and don't consider where educational research fits in. I don't know how many of you look at your school development plan, but is there any mention of educational research in there, or how professional development is going to be tailored towards that? So you do have to think more carefully about pupil need, what they actually need in the context of your school. But also, I think the more overlooked part is probably the teacher need. It's usually driven by pupil need, but what is the teacher need? What does each individual teacher need? What departments need? What do you perhaps need as a whole school focus? And how do you build research evidence into that? So all of that needs to feed in if you're going to be a research-informed school with research-informed practitioners.
So where are we now? Well, as I see it, we've sort of got 3 levels of research happening in schools at the minute. You've got small-scale research, such as lesson study, action research. You've got large-scale research, where increasingly now sort of teacher-school partnerships and alliances could be large-scale RCTs. And then you've got it happening at the level of the individual, where individuals are taking responsibility for what they're doing, attending events like this on a Saturday, and reading a lot of evidence. And I think one of the things that we might consider in schools is, what's the best use of our time? And I see a lot of instances where schools are doing huge randomized controlled trials and they're going completely over the head of the teachers. And likewise, teachers doing lesson study and action research and thinking, the worst thing you can hear is when you have a program of lesson study at the school and teachers are saying, what am I meant to do again? Just tell me what to do. And I think that one of the things that we might consider is, should teachers be reading research as opposed to doing research as a fundamental starting point? I think one of the most powerful things we did in our school, and one of the most powerful things I've seen in other schools, is creating a space within a school where conversations can take place that did not take place before. And you can sort of create, I've seen schools create a kind of like a top 10 list of things to read and have weekly discussions, and just no more than that, to get people from different departments coming together, talking about whatever it is, interleaving, space practice, and consider that in their own context. And just having the conversation within a school is an extremely powerful thing. If I was talking to myself 10 years ago when I first started teaching, these are the things I wish I'd read. I can remember reading all this stuff, particularly the Donlowski study and the principles of instruction, thinking, of course, why am I getting kids to do treasure hunts and run around the classroom? And they're learning absolutely nothing. So these kind of 5 things here, and there's a very good list, actually, a better list on Tom Sherrington's blog, where it has links to all the things that you can download. So in our school, we looked at it. We wanted to ask the question: how could you structure research in a school? What does it actually look like? One of the things we did was we decided to create a team of research fellows, and we started to do a project. We had a question, and we said to the staff, right, we want 2 members from each faculty to meet regularly, read a sort of an area with a literature review, and then discuss it and then come up with more questions. We then also had a student research council who on alternate weeks would also read it, because we just thought that might be interesting to see what they think. And then we had a situation where the students would read this research about growth mindset or whatever. The staff would read it, and then we'd have all of them in a room together, and very often the kids had read more because the staff were on their sort of last legs with marking, and you'd have these amazing discussions between staff and students, and just everybody was kind of 1,000% more informed about what was happening. And then we had this kind of senior research team to do heavy lifting. If we needed a whole school survey done, they would help organise that. I think a really important thing is we focus a lot on what teachers are doing and not enough on what students are doing. And this study, I think it's one of the most important things that any teacher needs to read, and actually possibly students as well. It's a study from 2013 by Donlowski, where they reviewed all the evidence on study skills. They did it for years. And they discovered that the sort of 2 of the least effective things you can do are rereading material and highlighting it. It gives what Bjork calls the illusion of competence. You feel fluid with it, you feel that you know it, but it doesn't lead to any long-term gain. The 2 most effective were practice testing and distributed practice. The thing that Bjork calls desirable difficulties. But what was interesting about this study was that when they reviewed, or when they interviewed students and said, what do you think is the most effective study method, they all went for highlighting and rereading. And I've tried this so many times in different classes. Just, say to your class, well, you've got a test in 4 weeks, you've got your mock coming up. What are you actually going to do? And they would say, reread Macbeth. There's kind of very little knowledge about effective ways of studying. And this is something else that I think everyone should be aware of, as school leaders especially, because I'm sure you all work in a system where you have observations, and I'm sure you've all been graded at some point and everything else.
But here's one of the interesting and counterintuitive things about teaching is that we're all good at delivering a lesson, but we're not good at watching another lesson and understanding what's going on in it, because learning is far more complex than that. So this is a great slide, courtesy of Rob Coe. We try to use it a lot. They're poor proxies for learning. So if a poor proxy for being a really effective surgeon in Robert Lisson's day was to have blood encrusted all over the front of you, then these are the equivalents now. It's not to say that they're not desirable things in their way, but they're just not indicators of effective learning. So students are busy. In other words, they're all head down, they're all quiet, they're all getting on with it. Doesn't mean to say that they're actually learning anything. It depends what work they're doing. Others in there, the curriculum has been covered, or has been well covered. Classroom ordered, calm and under control. Yeah, we certainly want that, but you could have a perfectly quiet environment if it's Friday period 5 and you give them some really low caliber things to do because they're knackered and they want to get out the door. Then they could be nice and calm and quiet for you at the palm of your hand. You're not learning anything. So too often when appraisers go into a room to observe a lesson, 20, 30 minutes, and they're looking for these things, and if they see them, they think they're seeing effective teaching. If they don't see them, they think we're not seeing effective teaching. It's nonsense. The research that Rob's done on this shows a staggering number of teachers, even after a bit of training, are unable to effectively work out what's going on in a lesson.
This sort of stuff drives me nuts. Motivational posters in schools. When you look at the evidence, and it's really interesting now with growth mindset, a lot of people are asking questions about growth mindset. And there's something, if you look at a lot of the studies, and particularly some of the recent ones, two sort of phrases seem to crop up again and again and again. And they are null effect and no statistical significance. Now, while there may be, and there is good evidence from Carroll's work about the existence of growth mindset, we haven't yet figured out a way of really affecting that. Motivation doesn't always lead to achievement, but achievement often leads to motivation. And I think we've got the causal arrow sort of the wrong way around there very often, where we're trying to motivate kids into learning, when actually if you just scaffold something and get them to sort of achieve something, however small, then the motivation will come. So that idea about engagement and motivation, well, we know from the book of Graham Nuttall that just because they're engaged doesn't mean they're learning anything. A fantastic book, by the way, The Hidden Lives of Learners. You could read it in a weekend. It's an incredible piece of work. And his research showed that kids can be really busy with stuff that they already know how to do. So they may be consolidating. They're not really learning anything. They're just looking like they're learning something.
So this was our project, and we've been talking for a long time about, all these things bother us, and we would like to write a book about it. So we sat down, we planned it, and then we thought, actually, this might be better if we thought about doing it another way. First, we wanted to get more people on board, but also we thought, let's get some questions from teachers about things that actually make a difference in the classroom. We'll take those questions, we'll give them to experts, we'll put 2 experts in each area, so we get a bit of contrasting opinion, and we'll see what they say. And the steer that we gave to those people was that your answers should be practical. They should allow teachers to take something away that they can go and do in their classrooms that might well make a difference. So we lined up 10 chapters in all. 9 of them were standard format with 10 questions given to 2 people, and then the last chapter in independent learning, we asked the same thing of everyone who's in the book: what does independent learning look like in the classroom? Another very nebulous phrase. And it has been, I think, very well received because it tries to focus on how do we make research practical in the classroom, how do we make it understandable for teachers whose time, of course, is heavily pressed. So these are the sort of things we were looking for. We were looking for a common language to get over that problem I said earlier about most of the research being impenetrable, totally ununderstandable and incomprehensible. And we wanted it to be something that doesn't necessarily give people the answers. We don't think research does that, but we want to start a discussion and get people thinking about how it can look in their classroom, not just a generic classroom.
Yeah, I think that point about a common language is really important. There's a lot of sort of mediators now, a lot of very, very good people, creating this sort of kind of research lingua franca between students and researchers. If you're a highly busy teacher, you just haven't got the time or the energy, quite frankly, to read a lot of research papers.
So this is the lineup, and we're very fortunate because we've been working on EdFest to know a lot of these people, and what delighted us was they all jumped at the chance. Actually, we didn't have a single person who said to us, I'm not really interested in doing this. So we tried to get a bit of a spread of people from different backgrounds. So a lot of them classroom teachers, a lot of them authors, a couple of them academics. For the most part, they were people that were really keen to be able to translate research into classroom practice. So if there's any success in the book, I put it down to these people rather than us. It's a sort of book we organised more than anything else. But we ended up with 91 questions, so there's a little bit of something in it for everyone. And this is an example of the first chapter, Assessment, Marking and Feedback. So 10 questions pitched at Dylan William and Daisy Christodoulou. This is all Oliver's work, so all looks really good. And he was great at just actually lifting out sort of the key messages and putting them into a page. So again, trying to make this as accessible as possible and create that lingua franca that means something to teachers. And when we talked about time earlier on, teacher time, of course, is heavily precious, but it's not the case that engaging with research adds to your workload. It will not make you add to the number of hours you work in a particular week. Our contention is that if you're a research-informed practitioner, you can cut your workload. You can get things done with better efficacy and more quickly, because this is a classic example here. Dylan said very provocatively, if you're a teacher who's doing a forensic line-by-line marking of every piece of work from every one of your pupils, you are a bad teacher. I didn't mean that in the sense that you're a bad person or that you're incapable of teaching. You said that if you're spending all that time marking, when are you planning your lessons? When are you actually developing your professional practice? So in other words, this is what he suggested. You can have a better diet of assessment and feedback for pupils if you adopt a 4 quarters approach. So in other words, don't throw forensic marking completely in the bin, but just make it a quarter of what you do. There's a huge time saving already. Then do a skim marking of another one. This is where things like whole class feedback come in. So you can identify from reading 20, 25 responses that, okay, there are 3 things that as a class we really need to do. So let's focus on these 3 things. And that's so easy without having to put lots of written comments on it. But then the other half of it, there are 2 quarters, self-assessment. So pupils should be doing that with, of course, teachers monitoring the quality of it, and peer assessment, the other 25%. And this allows you to give live feedback in the classroom, which is much more meaning and impact than perhaps taking a week to turn around a set of essays. And so, the key message that Dylan comes out with as well, something we're repeating again and again as a mantra, the purpose of feedback should be to improve the student, not the work. We've had a really interesting response on Twitter to that, because that's been shared quite a lot. And a lot of people say, well, that's very self-evident, I knew that already. Good for you. Not everybody did, though. And lots of the time we're training young teachers to say, no, it's all about marking. How would you improve that piece of work? So we're talking about improving the student. It's a subtle shift in mindset that makes a very big difference.
Yeah, but it's interesting with marking feedback. A couple of years ago, lesson observations became sort of anathema in schools. And there was this sort of shift away from lesson observations. And you can kind of see the same thing happening now with marking and feedback. The level of marking that teachers are doing is out of all proportion with how useful it is. And obviously with the changes, particularly for myself as a teaching GCSE with English, it's just extraordinary. And you look at the impact it's having, the opportunity cost, and it's extremely low. And again, it's that thing, that sort of Robert Liston thing of, look at me, look what I'm doing. Meanwhile, the patient has died of infection. Dylan calls it the most expensive public relations exercise in history.
So this is another practical thing that comes out of that chapter. Someone says, okay, well, how are we going to make feedback more meaningful? So how do we get pupils to actually engage with it rather than just getting a bit of work back, looking at the number at the bottom of the grade at the bottom, shoving it in the folder or the bin or whatever else it is? It's to turn it into detective work. So in other words, using this example, you've got 15 answers, it's a maths bit of homework, hand it back to them and say, right, you've got 5 mistakes, find them. So what I've done on the back of this is quite significantly expand the amount of time and sort of exercises I do at the beginning of a lesson, getting pupils to engage with feedback. So certainly, unless it's a piece of summative assessment, I won't give them a mark or a grade. We'll give it back to them. And even if it means that I have to kind of accept something with my feedback on it, but I will always get them, even with summative assessment, to look at it and try to investigate it themselves and see how they can learn something from it so that they get better as a student. So it's trying to vary the type of feedback you get and actually turning it into a bit of a task. It doesn't have to be a slog, so I love the idea, but making it detective work. They've got to find something out. Feedback can be a puzzle that they solve and they learn something from it.
So that's just Dylan there talking about, feedback, improving the work. An interesting thing I've noticed that in teaching, say, English A-level or GCSE, the thing that I've noticed that improves kids quicker than anything is when they look at something that's really good and they sort of evaluate it. It's very difficult to be excellent if you don't know what it looks like. And I spent so long saying to students, your writing needs to be more sophisticated. As Douglas Reeves calls it, it's less of a medical and more post-mortem. And students are, it's that thing of, well, if I knew how to do it in the first place, then I would have done it. But I think when they see, particularly if they see peers in their own lesson, how things are phrased and what they look and but they don't want to do that. They're in this culture of, you're the teacher, you need to mark it and give me written work and give me a grade.
So we, actually this was probably the toughest intellectual bit of writing the book, because we just sort of sat down in a room. It was in the holidays, we wrote it in July, and we had a sort of big blank whiteboard in front of us that covered the whole wall. We just thought, right, if we were to put down on this board everything we think is kind of really important in teaching practice, what would that look like? And the more we thought about it, the more we thought, actually, most of this is fluff. So if you're familiar with this, again, historical example, this is Martin Luther. So Martin Luther, in the Protestant Reformation, basically thought, right, there is so much in the way of inherited knowledge, a scholastic approach to learning, but nobody ever queries this or questions this. And he took a look at it and said, you know what, you simply don't need most of this. It's adiaphora. You can do it if you want, but it's not going to get you into heaven. So in other words, what's the point? So in other words, for Luther, it was about faith in God, read Scripture. That's pretty much what you need to do if you want to get into heaven. You can forget pilgrimages and everything else. So we thought, how do we apply that logic to classroom practice? And that's where we came up with our model, again, a suggested one for you, of a streamlined classroom. Again, this feeds into that idea that to be research informed should cut your workload. So rather than trying to be a circus performer doing 101 different things and differentiating the lesson 58 separate ways and all the rest of it, learning styles, actually, this is what we think is very useful. So if you have a positive classroom climate, so in other words, clear routines, so pupils actually fit into a rhythm in your classroom, and you have high expectations of them, that certainly makes a difference. Plenty of research to back that one up.
Yeah, we were working with about 20 schools, and there was a lot of teachers who were kind of new teachers, and we thought, how could you just kind of whittle everything down into just one thing that they should know? What's the thing that they should focus on? And I think the feedback one was really fascinating to us, because so many teachers had just no idea. So they were being told about assessment for learning and what Dylan Winnie, and they were shocked to find that Dylan Winnie was actually saying this. And then the stuff on cognitive load, I think is really interesting at the minute when you talk to teachers about cognitive load theory and what it means, and it almost comes full circle. And I think, well, that was what I thought in the first place. Don't overload. Make it easy for them.
And this here on guiding success, just a word about that as well. Martin Robinson said a really interesting thing in the final chapter. You've got to see independent learning as what we want pupils to be like at the end of their school career, so kind of ready for the next step in life. But it's a long game. We're not talking like this term, this year. We're talking 3, 4, 5 years. You've got to see it in those terms. So in other words, we need to scaffold learning and gradually, over a long period of time, remove the scaffold, little step by little step, until we get to the point of expertise. Independent learning can only be done by people who are experts. You can throw out an independent learning task to people who's not an expert, and they can rummage around and try and find things, but they're not really going to learn very much at all. So you need to think a little bit differently. So we were in a school where suddenly independent learning was going to be brought in and say, right, everyone, make sure the children learn independently. They shouldn't be dependent on the teacher. It doesn't really work like that. So what we're saying is an important decision, strategic decision to be made by you, based on your expert knowledge of your pupils. At what point do you remove scaffolding? At what point do you think they hit a point of expertise? They will by the end, but it's not going to be in like first year of secondary school.
one of the kind of conclusions we came to is that learning has to mean changes in long-term memory. If it's not that, then what are we talking about? And if students if they don't have that, then they're kind of flailing around and guessing. They're not really working independently. They're just guessing. I think that on the last point there, this is from the work of Rosenshine. You know, effective teachers, they review learning very often. And it's fine to say that in principle. I still think there's so much work to be done on that, particularly around teachers using quizzing, interleaving, and spaced learning. Where do you do it? What's the optimum space between it? If you're teaching Macbeth, Jekyll and Hyde, Inspector Calls, when do you do it? How do they need to encounter the same question 3 different times on 3 different occasions? Should they be quizzing themselves? All of these are questions that I think we need to explore.
So big messages here. So these are the things we'd like to take away, just as points of reflection as much as anything else. But you know, we will keep on saying this again and again and again until the message gets across. We do think that being research informed should be about reducing workload, not increasing it. In other words, if you're myth busting, then you'll save an awful lot of wasted time on initiatives and interventions that simply do not work and have no basis in evidence. Okay? And also reading significant research before you do research. So you don't go charging ahead with actual research projects unless you've actually got some sort of training and knowledge and understanding of how it's going to work, because that will end up counteracting the first important point. We don't want this to add to workload. Very few teachers are trained properly in how to do research, so don't feel that you have to do that or you should go engage with that. We're not going to stop you if you want to, but we just don't think you actually have to.
It's funny if you well, what I've found is, I don't know if anyone else here has found this, but the more evidence I read, the more confused I am. I can remember in the first year of teaching, so grasping onto a few things and going, that's it, I've absolutely nailed it. And then there's this kind of gradual process of humiliation where you realise, yeah, maybe. And I've found this phrase by John Keats really useful. He has this concept that he calls negative capability, which essentially means the ability to hold 2 opposing thoughts at the same time without trying to privilege one over the other. And for me, that sums up education research. We often think about research in terms of privileging, and that's why I think the phrase "what works" is sometimes unhelpful. It may be the case that there are 2 opposing entities in the same space, and we should be humble enough to realise it is that complex. I think we often try to sort of achieve very complex ends through very simple means. And being research informed, reading evidence, means that you're just more confused, but you're in a better place ultimately to make decisions.
So on that, looking at the clock, we're kind of like bang on the end. Very happy to take questions though. We're going to do a quick changeover with Tom. And if we don't get time to answer your question right now, come and harangue us over lunch. So we really enjoy talking about this, so please do. Would anyone like to ask anything right now? Yes?
Sorry, could you just clarify what the difference is between distributed practice and interleaved practice?
Yeah.
Sorry if everybody else knows that.
Well, interleaving is it's like a kind of imbrication process. You sort of you take the same thing, but you mix it up. So let's say you're doing Macbeth, you would look at it instead of doing it on the one day, you'd sort of mix it up. Distributed practice is really how often you space it out. So how often you encounter that same material. But I think the thing to look at there is, well, I don't know if you know the learning scientists.
Yes.
If you look at their blog, it's just, I think that it's the go-to resource for a lot of this stuff. It's so useful, it's so effective.
Yeah.
I'd just like to know where do you think all the activity provision fits into the research? You know, how speak about the new, teachers that are professional ready for it.
No, that's a really good question. So I worked with Southampton University, some people on their school direct programme for 2 or 3 years about a really interesting and formative experience, and they did brilliant work. Other universities I know are not interested in this. Just come back to Scotland now, so I've been working there just this academic session, and really interesting to place at Glasgow University, absolutely right on this. Bob Davis, who's just retired as Chair of Education there, basically made cognitive psychology a compulsory model for all students there, and that's fantastic. But then I had a student, a trainee, from another university, which shall remain nameless, that was in our school a couple of weeks ago with a lesson observation form that had a big chunk about how are you using learning styles. And I thought, oh, come on, so the answer to that is highly variable, and I think if this is going to be easier for us as teachers to remedy these sorts of problems and bust the myths, we need universities to have a look at what we're doing and reshape the ITT, ITE programs around that. And maybe academics will disagree with me on that one, but it's something I spend a lot of time on and really interested in, and I would love to see more of this flowing back the way. So the good thing about things like Research Ed, and that's what I'm trying to decide in Research Ed Scotland, is have that conversation, that dialogue. So at the moment, universities and schools are a little bit like that. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, have a good lunch. Thank you very much.